Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show in association with DavidIke.com.
Good morning, good morning, good morning to you. How are you? It's Sunday morning, the 20th of March 2016. And as I talk to you, it's bang on at the top of the hour, 11 a.m. GMT. Hope you're in good form. Hope you had a good weekend, or you're in the middle of a good weekend. I can tell you it's glorious in Manchester today. A cold old day yesterday, but today it's absolutely beautiful. I'm looking forward to spending some time in the sunny weather at some stage today. So there you are. Do you know what I saw today? I had a bit of a late one last night. I was in pretty fine form when I went to bed, but I had a late one and I thought I might just do a live Sunday View today. And thinking about it and thinking on it, I thought, well, I'm going to do it live from now on. So what I'll do from now on in, and I'll publicise this more next week, is that from 11 a.m. on Sunday mornings, for an hour or thereabouts, it'll be live with the podcast to follow. It's easier that way, and it's better. And I do get a chance then to see the breakfast news programmes, and I can be a bit more up to date with what it is that I'm talking about on the programme. This show, as always, is brought to you in association with DavidIke.com/headlines. Check out David's site. The headlines page is brilliant, and a lot of what I talk about, whether it's on Sunday View or whether it's on the radio show, is found on DavidIke.com/headlines. It's an inspiration to me, so there will be a lot of interesting stories, many interesting stories on David's website today, and terrific analysis of what's really behind the news headlines. Great stuff. And of course, you know David is on tour this year and next, and the book, Phantom Self, all the details on his website there. So yeah, terrific, good stuff. I'm actually delighted. I said to myself, this will work, do it live, and we'll see how it goes. So we're going to do it live from now on in anyway. Now, ordinarily at the very beginning of Sunday View, I have a good look down through the British tabloids and the British broadsheet newspapers and tell you what's in those papers as best as I possibly can. However, I'm not going to dwell too much on them today because, by the way, before I even mention that, you see, I've already forgotten that I'm live. Because I'm live, I'm going to emphasise live and annoy you with the term live. You can basically tweet to me at Richie Allen Show. Tweet at Richie Allen Show to drop me a message at Richie Allen Show, and I will read it out as I get them. Good morning, Karen. Good morning, Anne Selly. And good morning, Marco. Nice to know you've joined me at short notice this Sunday morning. I tell you what I'm going to do before I even look at the papers. An email came in, and I might get a lump in my throat reading this, but if I do, I do. There's nothing I can do about it. It just as I was, with about 30 seconds to go, an email came in from Stephen O'Farrell. Now, it actually came in overnight, but I only opened the email 30 seconds to go. So I'll read you the email uninterrupted, verbatim. I won't leave anything out. Hey, Rich, how are you? Love your show for a million different reasons, but tonight I learned something from you. I live in Brighton, and I went to a Paddy Street party, etc., and I've always been generous to the homeless, as Brighton is packed full of them, but never really gave a SHIT. But always chucked them some change if I'm in a good mood. But you always say, if you see somebody homeless, buy them a tea or a sandwich. Anyway, in Brighton, the homeless charities say, don't give them any money, give it to us instead. What a load of B. So anyway, I was walking home through town starving, or what I perceived to be starving, and saw some poor guy in a blanket, so I thought of you and bought him a chicken burger meal. I jumped in a taxi, and as I drove past him, looked at him, and he was steaming right into the food. And I thought to myself, a so-called charity would rather me give them a fiver over this poor guy on the street. Not sure what the point of the story is, but a homeless man had a nice treat tonight thanks to you, so they did. There's plenty of points to the story, Stephen. And it wasn't thanks to me, mate. It was thanks to you. It's the smallest and the easiest thing you can do that costs you nothing other than £1 or £1.50 or £2. I know some people don't have that. But if you do have the means and you see somebody who's struggling, ask them, are they hungry? Discreetly. You all right for a bit of grub, mate? You want something? And he or she might take it, he or she might not. And that's the least you can do. The point you're making about the charities is a very well made one. there are billboards in Manchester, actually billboards recommending you don't interact with homeless men and women, that you give to some initiative that Manchester City Council is running. Absolutely reprehensible, isn't it? It's completely insane to say to people, don't have anything to do with them. Give us your money and trust us to look after them. Stephen, you did a great thing, my friend, and I guarantee you, by you doing that, somebody else would have seen it, and it would have inspired somebody else to do something similar. 5 minutes past the hour. This is Live Sunday View in association with davidicke.com/headlines. Beautiful Sunday morning here in the northwest in the great city of Manchester. So the Sunday papers then are basically dominated, and they are dominated, by the Ian Duncan Smith story. Okay? You will know by now, you should do anyway, that the former, because he is the former, well, he was the the secretary at the Department of Work and Pensions when he resigned on Friday. The Observer, the Sunday Observer, says that because of his resignation, the Conservative Party is at war. The paper says David Cameron and George Osborne are struggling to maintain a semblance of unity in the party after Duncan Smith said he had quit because he regarded welfare cuts as morally indefensible. Don't scream at me. We'll get to that now in a minute. We'll have plenty to say about, will the real Ian Duncan Smith please stand up? We'll get to that in a minute. The Sunday Times, again, interesting story there. Fertility hope for cancer victims. I don't have the time to have a look at what that's about, but I might look into it for the show, for the radio show next week. But again, the main headline, IDS attack shreds unfit Osborne's dream of number 10. The Sunday Times are basically saying that what Ian Duncan Smith has done really is he's scuppered any chances Osborne has of being Prime Minister. That's the Sunday Times take on it. Rupert Murdoch's Sunday Times. They said that Osborne's leadership hopes were pronounced dead in the water as friends of Duncan Smith branded George Osborne unfit to be a Prime Minister. Well, he isn't fit to be a human being. So if you're not a human being, surely you don't qualify for the high office of Prime Minister. But then it didn't stop previous Prime Ministers. I hear you. Loud and clear. Sunday Telegraph, knives out for Osborne in Tory backlash. Again, like the Times, they're saying that Osborne is going to be the big loser here. Well, he is a loser. A similar theme, saying Downing Street is battling to avert a full-blown leadership crisis as Osborne gets an unprecedented backlash from Conservative MPs. The Sunday Mail says that the exchange between David Cameron, the Prime Minister, and Ian Duncan Smith was full of four-letter words. Yeah, a furious Mr. Cameron says the Mail unleashed a four-letter rant at Duncan Smith over his resignation, with the Prime Minister said to have exploded with rage. How do you explode with rage? Here's an interesting story that's not Ian Duncan Smith related. It might be in the future, please God. Please God. It's about court being filmed. How cool would that be? Ian Duncan Smith and his cronies in court for crimes against humanity. But apparently, the Express says that the Sunday Express says that murder trials at courts, including the Old Bailey, could be broadcast live on television under government plans to show justice being done. Well, it could have finished with or not being done, as the case may be. Justice being done for those who can afford it, and no justice for those who can't. The Sunday People have a lot about Princess Diana on there. The 20th anniversary of her death is next year. Am I right in saying it's next year? It'll be 19 years this year, 20 years next year. They're going to create a special garden at Kensington Palace. And the Sunday People thinks that's the biggest story of the day. That's their front page. Yeah. And Paul O'Grady, who's a comedian and an actor and a television presenter, and a very good one, it must be said. He's a very good television presenter. I like the way he interviews people. He's very interested in people. Paul O'Grady is blaming government cuts for the quality of hospital treatment of his sister after she suffered a heart attack. O'Grady, bungling NHS nearly killed my sister. And I am going to talk to you a little bit about the NHS shortly. Today is the last print edition of the Sunday Independent, by the way. You might have heard me mention this on Sunday View well, I don't know, a couple of weeks back. We did speak about it on the radio show as well. This is a tragedy, by the way. This is a tragedy. And it is a system-serving inevitability, what's happening to the media. No, I'm not saying the Independent on Sunday is always a great bastion of journalism and holding power to account, but they have some brilliant journalists and it's done some terrific work over the years. It's the last print edition of the paper today. Yeah, these are difficult times for newspapers. There's no doubt about that. And despite the fact that on this programme and on others, we lampoon, we mock, we criticise and hold up in contempt newspapers and what they do, ultimately we're better off with them than without them. You know, we really are. It's coming up for 11 minutes past the hour. This is Sunday View in association with davidicke.com/headlines. Good morning, Tommy B. Good morning, Arnold. Or Anhold, it is, not Arnold, Anhold. Good morning, Anhold. Good morning, David Kona as well. Did I mention Sue? How you doing, Sue? Nice to know you're listening. And Sean, I mentioned Sean, did I? Sean McDonald. Keep those tweets coming in. Remember, don't just tweet me to say hello, by the way. Tweet me with opinions. Tweet me with opinions. Karen Kelly says, Richie, it must be paving the way for that buffoon Boris. Heaven forbid. I think Karen Kelly has got it right. Spot on the money there, Karen. Paul Alawi, how you doing, Paul? I bet they'll never broadcast sex offender trials out of fear of us finding out just how widespread the system's leniency is. Yeah. And Big Conspiracy tweets me to say, always inspired by the show, Richie, and from the comments shared by other listeners. Keep it up. We get some amazing tweets and comments from people. We really do. It's nice to have a platform where they can say things and they can be read out. That's brilliant. A lot of people saying well done to Stephen for his act of generosity in Brighton. Lovely story. I don't think he's looking for any praise. I think he's just acknowledging that it was a small thing to do. It didn't really cost him very much and he might have made somebody happy for a short period of time. Shall we crack on with the programme then? Like I said, I have no idea how long these things are going to last on Sundays. I've worked pretty hard to put together a few things and when they run out, I'll stop. So I reckon it'll be about an hour. All right, we'll have a break. One break we'll take, but it'll be about an hour anyway. So we've had a look at the papers then, very Ian Duncan Smith centric. By the way, what do you think is really going on with Ian Duncan Smith's resignation? Tweet at Richie Allen Show or email richie@richieallen.co.uk and tell me what you think the resignation was all about. Now, you will probably know by now that a short time ago, just over an hour ago, Ian Duncan Smith gave his first television interview since resigning. He gave it to Andrew Marr on BBC One's Andrew Marr Show. And I, of course, recorded it, you see. You have to be up early to get ahead of me. So I recorded it and I've chopped it up into little bits and pieces that I found interesting. So Smith was on Andrew Marr this morning. So here is some of what Marr and Smith got into.
Your critics in government say two things. First of all, this was your scheme. The PIPs was your idea. Absolutely. And indeed revising it was your idea. And you defended it right up to the last minute. You sat through the cabinet on the budget and didn't say anything about it, didn't raise the problem then.
Shall I deal with this?
Yes, well, come on.
Right,
And then you didn't go and see the Prime Minister, and then as late as Friday morning, your department were briefing, as it were, in favour of the change that you have resigned over.
Okay, let me just deal with all of that, first of all. You are, let me go right back to the time of the election. After the election last year, I took a decision. And these are decisions you take if you're going to join government. You have to balance whether or not you can make changes, you can do what you hope to do. On balance, you'll have to compromise, but do those compromises benefit or damage society? I have been passionate about the issue of social justice. I set up the Centre for Social Justice years ago. I have campaigned to make sure that there's a conservative way of delivering help and support to those who most in need, not just through money, but through a whole variety of other ways, getting people back into work. My problem throughout this last period didn't start last week or the week before. through the debates and the disputes that I've had on tax credits, on the cutting away and eroding of universal credits allowances, and then the big assault on the taper. What is the taper? It helps people move on up the hours. It would benefit people enormously getting them back to work.
So it's a long-running thing.
This has been a long-running problem where I felt really semi-detached, in a sense, isolated more often in these debates, because I'm not able to convince people that what we were losing progressively, and this was my worry, was the narrative that the Conservative Party was this one nation party caring about those who don't even necessarily vote for it, who may never vote for it. That is my problem. And this,
I suppose the double question there is, you went along with all those cuts, and then in the key cabinet meeting you didn't say anything.
Well, I actually thought last year about resigning. I think that actually got into the papers as well, over this attack on universal credit. And again, I balanced this and said, I will continue because we can continue to make these arguments.
Mara does a decent job of interviewing Duncan Smith today. The entire interview, which lasted about 18 minutes, is available on the BBC iPlayer. Now, don't throw things at me when I say Mara did a good job. You have to be honest when a presenter does a decent job. He put the questions and the points to him. Smith is basically adopting the position that he didn't like it, that ultimately he was on the side of the people. I wanted to resign, but I stuck in there simply to make the arguments on behalf of the people. At no point does Mara say, now in fairness, you could criticise Mara, because at no point does Mara say, well, you didn't look so reluctant when punching the air and jumping up and down with joy and screaming and whooping like a banshee when Osborne was announcing every single budget that Osborne announced that cut more and more money from those who needed it most. But otherwise, Mara did all right. Smith then says that over the period of the last election, we'll move on. I'll tell you what, in the interest of time, we will do that. Because what Smith says next is that basically over the period since the last election, since May 2015, when the Conservatives won a majority, or did they really? Did they? I have serious doubts about the validity and the fairness of the last general election. But anyway, that's for another day. But Smith says that it was really since then that he had begun to kind of have doubts about what was going on. Take a listen.
Collectively, over that period, I had come to believe that we had begun to lose our sense that if we really want to do this so that all people bear this and those who can't bear the least of the burden, then we are beginning to lose that message. And that was my concern. It wasn't about Friday night or Wednesday. It was a collective sense that from the last election, we had begun to abandon that position, and I felt that would narrow us, and the party that I love dearly and serve, and the country that I love, would not benefit from that. I want us to be in government, but to govern for all the people, all of the time.
The country he loves. Now again, Mara could have said to him there, well, things didn't really begin to get bad for people after the last election. The horrendous cuts and the misery that was heaped on those who are the least fortunate in society began in the coalition government before you. You see, Mara should be jumping in there saying to him, this doesn't add up here. You know, you stood over all of this. As we heard in the first clip of the interview, you know, he signed off on all of this before the budget was announced last week. He said it's damaging. I'll tell you what, Mara then asks him about fairness. We'll stick with fairness, right? This is Mara asking him about fairness.
Now, in very, very sort of clear, simple terms, that's why I asked you at the beginning, do you think this is an unfair or immoral situation? Because you're cutting taxes for the better off at the same time as you're cutting benefits for disabled people. Do you think that's unfair?
Juxtapose as it is, as it came through in the budget, that is deeply unfair and was perceived to be unfair. And that unfairness is damaging to the government, it's damaging to the party, and it's actually damaging to the public.
It's actually damaging to the public, he says. It's actually damaging to the public. How insightful. Are you buying any of this, by the way? Are you buying any of what Ian Duncan Smith is saying about misgivings and about problems with the way things were being done and, you know, heartache at what was happening to the disabled? I'm going to tell you what I think shortly about what's really going on here. Mara then mentions that disabled people listening to him on the programme today, well, that they simply will not be buying what it is that he's selling. Have a listen.
Ian Duncan Smith, do you understand that among a lot of disabled campaigners and so forth, there will be a certain amount of hollow laughter because they still see you as the man that supported things like the benefits cap, that supported the bedroom tax, that supported lots of things which have caused real hardship to people at the bottom of the heap? And they see you as the bad guy.
Okay.
They find it hard to see you as the great reformer and champion of disability rights.
All I would say is, behind the scenes, we have spent a lot trying to even out and smooth out those proposals and policies. You know, for example, discretionary housing payments massively increased at my request and demand from the Treasury, so that people who had difficult problems, local authorities would be able to give them much more money and support them.
Yeah. Again, you know, while at one saying Mar didn't do too bad a job, there are many opportunities there for him to jump in there and say, well, hang on a second here, you know, yet again, it was you screaming and jumping up and down and punching the air with that mask of semi-fury, semi-joy on your face, while these cuts to the most vulnerable people in society were being announced. And he really should have pressed them on that, Mar. Mar seems to have been happy enough just to mention it once, but you really need to go after him there to say, look, nobody's going to buy this conscience nonsense. You know, this is the very first we're hearing about this. I'm going to give you my take on it shortly. You might or might not agree with it. Then he really lays it on sick, Ian Duncan Smith, about how much he cares for his people, the British people. And again, Mar seems pretty happy for him to carry on with that. This is Ian Duncan Smith, remember, in his first television interview after resigning as Work and Pension Secretary. It's with the BBC and Andrew Marr this morning. Here he is laying it on sick again about how much he loves people and how much he wants to make people's lives better.
The problem I face is that my care for my countrymen and women leads me to believe I am resigning because I want my government to think again about this and get back to that position that I believe, which is about being a one nation. This is not some secondary attempt to attack the Prime Minister or about Europe. There's nothing to do with that at all. If I wanted to do that, I would have been clear. I've never, ever hidden my views about something, and I'm not doing it now. I am genuinely concerned.
Did he call you hypocritical and something worse in those conversations?
Look, you know, there are only two people engaged in this conversation, Andrew, and I'm always intrigued when others who weren't actually engaged in those conversations seem to know what happened. My sense about this was it was robust. We had a long set of conversations. I listened to him. I acted on what he asked me to do, to think about things. And I reached finally the conclusion that I just simply couldn't stay. But as I've made clear in the letter, I am proud to have served with the Prime Minister. I'm proud of what we've achieved in the last 5 to 6 years.
And again, now if you listen to the rest of that, Mar doesn't jump in and again pull him back to the 5 or 6 years, because the attacks on the most vulnerable in terms of taking vital oxygen away from them, the oxygen of money's an energy, what they absolutely need to survive, to clothe themselves, to heat themselves and to feed themselves, that's been going on since the Conservatives came to power with the Liberal Democrats in 2010. And they've never taxed fairly. No Conservative government in history has ever fairly taxed any society. They have always looked after the top 5%, the top 10%, the top 1%, you might say, of the highest earners in society. You know? And he was there, remember, in the last Parliament, laughing as the cuts were announced. Now, and you can't get that image out of your head there. You also can't get the image out of your head, or I can't get the sound out of my head, of people who've come on this programme who have been humiliated, who have been subjected to the worst kind of treatment when going to work assessments set up by Ian Duncan Smith's Department for Work and Pensions, where in some cases people with disabilities were asked had they ever had suicidal thoughts, and when they said no, they were asked why not. And we were able to prove this. You know, we broke that story here. This guy is sick. And I'm not buying any of that. And again, I'm going to tell you shortly what it is I think. You won't be surprised when I tell you what I think is really going on. Before I tell you what others are saying about this, the tweets are flying in, so I'm going to read a few of the tweets anyway. First of all, Jane says, hi, morning all. Beautiful blue skies in Hamilton, she says, but unfortunately ruined by the usual chemtrails they've been at it all week. Hayley was on to say, Hayley, how are you? That's Hayley in Stockport. Ian Duncan Smith, whoever replaces him will be worse or just as bad, I imagine, she says. He's been replaced by a man called Stephen Crabb. Stephen Crabb is the man. And Crabb spoke to the BBC yesterday. Do you want to hear some of that? He said that there will be some challenging decisions in the days ahead. Have a listen to Crabb speaking to the BBC briefly.
Well, obviously really pleased to take on the role as Secretary of State for Work and Pensions. Perhaps not quite in the circumstances that I had imagined, but it's a huge privilege to be working on issues that are very close to my heart, at the heart of government, at a really important time. It's obviously very early days, and I haven't even had a chance to speak to my new team at the department yet. But clearly there's a really important mission that this government has in terms of reforming our welfare system to better support people making the transition into work. It's one of the reasons that we now have record employment levels in this country. It's because we've spent 6 years focusing really sharply on this key issue of welfare reform. I intend to carry on with that, but obviously we've also got some quite challenging decisions and issues to focus on in the immediate days ahead.
How is government policy going to change?
Well, I think I should wait till at least I've had my foot through the door and sat down with my new team and seen what's in my in tray before discussing anything to do with policy changes.
Now, Stephen Crabb, Hayley, this might answer some of the questions about what this is really all about. I've been playing that clip of Stephen Crabb there. I've played it from the BBC News website. And Stephen Crabb is a good-looking young man. He's a pretty homely-looking young man. He's got a very nice countenance. If I go all Shakespearean there, he's got a nice countenance about him. He looks like a charming kind of fella, and he speaks very well. What's that got to do with the price of onions, Richie? I'll tell you. I'll tell you in a few minutes what this might just be all about. And I'm going to read some more tweets now before we hear from Jeremy Corbyn. By the way, this is Sunday View and it's live. Hey, it's live for the first time on Sunday, the 20th of March 2016. Why make the podcast? Why not just do it live and get your interaction as well? And I'm delighted that you're interacting. I want to say to Colm in Dublin. Colm, how are you? Diagwit, my friend, Diagwit. To Joe Wood, how you doing, Joe? Big help to the show is Joe tweeting stuff out there and alerting me to stories. Ian Duncan Smith's a parasite, Richie. Obviously, he's set for life now, says Joe. Yeah, and we'll come to that again in a minute. Tommy says he doesn't say that. He says Ian or IDS is only interested in IDS. Purely self-political move. Certainly no room for a U-turn in his heart. Leopard and Spots, says Tommy. Karen was back on to say, I'm shaking my head here. Really? IDS, he has a plan. He's up to something, says Karen, and he might very well be up to something. We'll get to that in a second. And I've had a couple of Facebook messages. I'm surprised I noticed these because I'm really only focusing on Twitter. But on the whole thing where it was announced in the Sunday Express today that they might want to film court proceedings, Crown Court proceedings in future. Nice message from Angela Drake. How you doing, Angela? Good morning to you. Richie, I bet they won't film the family courts. No, they won't, Angela. Absolutely right, they won't. Where they steal, where they kidnap children from parents, from young men and women who don't deserve it and have done nothing to deserve it. That's a great comment. Great comment. I want to say good morning as well to Margaret Snedden. Margaret, good morning to you. How are you? So everybody's been speculating as to why this Ian Duncan Smith's character, I was going to say stuff. I'm mindful of the fact that I'm live and there might be children listening, so I'm on my best behaviour today. Okay? Lady Altman put out a statement. And Lady Altman, the peer, of course, said she was shocked by the resignation, saying her former boss had championed the very package of reforms to disability benefits he now says is the reason he has resigned. This is important. This is important. Somebody who worked for him said she was shocked by the resignation, that her boss had championed the very package of reforms that he now says is the reason he resigned. Now, Andrew Marr did put that to him, in fairness, but he got a very long, boring answer that lulled him into a kind of a coma, and Marr didn't jump on him when he started telling lies. Well, he started telling lies. the minute he sat down on the sofa. Now, Lady Altman said this is about the European referendum campaign. It isn't, but they want you to think it is. It isn't about that at all. They say he wants to do maximum damage to the party in order to further his campaign to get Britain to leave the EU. No chance. It's certainly not about that. Sir Malcolm Rifkind, former Foreign Secretary, another horrible man, said that Smith quite clearly knew before the Chancellor's statement how the department would be affected. In that, Rifkind is absolutely right. Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the opposition, spoke to ITV News yesterday and had this to say about Smith resigning.
Well, I think he's done the right thing to resign because, after all, this is a man who's presided over some fairly appalling policies, but this latest example of cutting the personal independence payments of a very large number of people, removing their ability to develop themselves independently, live independently, is shocking. And he's resigned, but I really think the problem is the Chancellor of the Exchequer, George Osborne, who balances a budget on the basis of cutting PIPs and then announces it's a process of consultation. When I listened to the budget on Wednesday, it was very clear to me that that's what he intended to do. Well, this is a man who has presided over so much that has been so damaging to the lives of so many people with disabilities. He's taken so much away from people with disabilities, and he's suddenly found a conscience now. I wonder where the conscience has been hiding for the past 6 years.
Yeah, where has the conscience been hiding for the past number of years? And again, to his credit, Andrew Marr did ask him that, but didn't expand on it. He didn't stick him to the wall, as a good radio presenter or television presenter is supposed to do. And that is to keep bringing him back to that. You know, he knew all about these cuts. He was quite happy to sign off on them. All of a sudden, no. Some of them saying it's about the European Union. It isn't. Now, do you know, dear listener, how I often lament the state of the media, both in Britain and in Europe in general and in the United States and beyond. And I talk at length about it because it's something I know a little bit about, having worked in the mainstream media, having studied very, very closely the methodology of the mainstream media and how it does what it does. Well, Tim Montgomery writes for the Times newspaper. Now, Rupert Murdoch owns the Times newspaper. And what else did Tim Montgomery do at one time? He worked for Ian Duncan Smith and is a friend of his. Now, do you see anything wrong with that picture? Huh? A guy is writing for the Times, writing about the Department of Work and Pensions, a guy who was a friend, is a friend, and previously worked for Ian Duncan Smith. Shouldn't people see that there's something wrong with broadsheet newspapers employing columnists to write objectively on these issues? How could they be objective? How could they hold these people to account? How can they do that when they have relationships with them? And I was thinking this morning, it's actually a form of embedding, isn't it? You know, when writers are embedded with the army, when the army are at war, and you know that the military had the bright idea, and it was a very bright idea after the Vietnam War. In future, let's bring the journalists with us. Therefore, we can control the narrative. That's what embedding is in the army. But isn't that what we're seeing here? When Tim Montgomery writes for the Times, he's the guy who writes on the Work and Pensions Department. He's the guy who writes about that. And yet he used to work for Smith and is a friend of his? Come on, give me a break. How could it not be slanted? Do you want to hear how slanted it is? Tim Montgomery spoke to BBC News yesterday about Ian Duncan Smith. Have a listen to this. You're not going to believe this. Have I got it? I have. I thought I'd lost it for a second. So this is Ian Duncan Smith's friend, now writing for the Times, allegedly, objectively, allegedly working on your behalf to hold these people to account. This is him on the BBC breakfast show yesterday. And he says Duncan Smith has been concerned for a long time.
And I think Ian has been concerned for a long time that younger families, the working age population, have had to bear a large brunt of the cost of deficit reduction, while certain groups have not been sharing responsibility. And that's, I think, why he ends his letter of resignation to the Prime Minister with that question: are we really all in this together? Which was one of the catchphrases, the iconic catchphrases of the early David Cameron years.
He says that some of these changes that were mooted to disability benefits were defensible in narrow terms, given the deficit, but they're not defensible in the way they're placed within the budget, as you say, alongside those tax cuts. But a lot of people will say, this is the man who spent years and years looking at the welfare system, who's the architect of these extremely deep reforms which we've seen, which a lot of critics would say they've already been devastating for the poorest, most vulnerable people in this country.
Well, a lot of people would say that. I would also argue, Ian Duncan-Smith would certainly argue, that the reforms have underpinned an incredible improvement in the jobs market. Britain has created more jobs in recent years than the rest of Europe put together.
Well, that's
more
not because
jobs.
of reforms to welfare.
Well, I think it has helped in part that work has been incentivised. We've had a massive decline in the number of workless households. Take, for example, the sanctions regime, which is incredibly controversial. A lot of the people, and probably you would cite, object to those sanctions, but actually really forcing people to confront the decision, that choice between work and benefits, has, according to the Bank of England, probably been a part of the explanation for why we've seen so many jobs in Britain created compared to anywhere else.
Now, I bet you're thinking, because I know you, we know each other. You're thinking, dear listener, that you cannot believe your ears. I can't believe... Did he really say, the writer for the Times, who's supposed to be holding power to account on behalf of his readers, did he really defend devastating cuts by basically saying that the cuts have forced lazy people back into work? Did he say that? Let's have a listen, because I'm pretty sure that's exactly what he said.
Europe put together
Well, that's
more
not because
jobs.
of reforms to welfare.
Well, I think it has helped in part that work has been incentivised. We've had a massive decline in the number of workless households. Take, for example, the sanctions regime, which is incredibly controversial. A lot of the people, and probably you would cite, object to those sanctions, but actually really forcing people to confront the decision, that choice between work and benefits, has, according to the Bank of England, probably been a part of the explanation for why we've seen so many jobs in Britain created compared to anywhere else.
Yeah, you heard it right there. The cuts were devastating in terms of they forced lazy people back into work and more jobs were created. We know that's not true. The jobs are worthless. 0 hours contracts jobs, worthless. That is the face of journalism, dear listener. That is it, right there. That is the definition of fascism right there. You have an organisation like the Times of London, a paper of record, and one of its senior journalists, who is responsible for reporting on the Department of Work and Pensions, is a friend and a former employee of Ian Duncan-Smith's. It's terrible. I know you're a hypocrite, Richie, because you said earlier on that it's a tragedy that the Sunday Times won't be in print anymore and that newspapers are important. Look, I'm not a hypocrite. I'd rather we had them than we didn't have them. That's disgraceful, isn't it? Ian Duncan-Smith hasn't grown a conscience. Do you know what I think is really behind all this? And by the way, there's a great story on davidicke.com headlines today about what happens when you don't have a robust media investigating and holding these people up to scrutiny. And I think what I've just played for you there is arguably the best example of it you'll ever get. That's your media right there. And apologies for the establishment. You know, you expected from the BBC, Channel 4 News, Jon Snow, that idiot Snow, and the woman and the Asian guy that present programmes as well. Guru Mercy is his name. I can never remember her name. The blonde woman. Her name will come to me shortly. You expected from these clowns. You expect a bit better from the print media, but not anymore. Not anymore. Do you know what I think is really going on here? Do you know what I think is really going on? People above the pay grade of David Cameron and George Osborne have realised how toxic Ian Duncan-Smith is. And there is some worry or some concern about a mobilisation of people in Britain disgusted by what the government is doing to the least fortunate in our society. And that mobilisation has a lot to do with the presence of the detestable to look at and detestable to listen to Ian Duncan Smith. So at some juncture, again above the pay grade of David Cameron, somebody has decided we need somebody else to be selling this misery to the greater population of Britain. We can't have him anymore as the front man for the devastation. I think that has a lot to do with it. And that's why Stephen Crabb comes in. I mentioned earlier on, and Paul's been tweeting out there, you know, Crabb is a young man. He's a reasonably attractive man. He speaks very well. He's always got a smile on his face. He's kind of gentle in his demeanour. Ian Duncan Smith's a bit toxic. You know, more and more people are turning against us. Less would do maybe if Smith was to be moved aside and we brought somebody else in. That's my 2 pence worth on it. What do you think? Am I right? Am I wrong? Tweet at Richie Allen Show now. Email richie@richieallen.co.uk. That's at Richie Allen Show on Twitter. The email is richie@richieallen.co.uk. Here's a very quick break. Back in a minute.
Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show in association with DavidIke.com.
Have you lost access to important data from a computer hard drive, mobile phone, or other storage device? Maybe you have a broken hard drive containing years of information, or a smartphone that no longer works from which you'd like the pictures, movies, and chats recovered. If you would like to recover data from any type of digital device, including desktop and laptop computers, external hard drives, cameras, smartphones, NAS, and RAID servers, then contact Data Clinic today at dataclinic.co.uk now.
Do you want to release the full potential of your soul consciousness and find out how to experience that power in all areas of your life now? Go to livingasyoursoul.com for free guidance with in-depth how-to articles, free healing meditations of creation recordings, free soul solutions, and much, much more. livingasyoursoul.com, making the profound practical.
Join in tonight's discussion by tweeting at Richie Allen Show now.
Or even this morning's discussion. How are you? It's live, by the way. Sunday View is brought to you live today. And a lot of you have tuned in to hear it live. I didn't think that you would, based on the fact that there wasn't very much notice given. So thanks for tuning into it. Delighted that you have done. It's about 18 minutes to the top of the hour. I've probably got another 10-15 minutes left before we wrap it up for this Sunday. And as I talk to you, the sun has gone behind a cloud. I'm hoping that it comes back out at some stage, because I do plan on getting out just for a wee while. I'm going to read a message from Angela before I crack on there. Angela, thanks. My friend went through hell in the family courts and was blackmailed by social services. They even took him to the police station to admit something he was later cleared of in county court. They tried to take his 3 children. His children stayed with their mother and he ended up doing nearly 4 years for a crime he didn't commit, says Angela. Wow. Angela, you'll have to send me an email and tell me how that turned out. And is the gentleman still in prison, and has there been any resolution? I would like to hear more about that. Thanks very much for sending me that message. Plenty of tweets coming in as well. Karen was on to say, you could be right, Richie. Smith's toxic and was waking up the sheep who don't care usually. Ronan was on to say, and Ronan is listening with his wife today. Ronan, how are you? Nice to hear from you. It's similar, Richie, to Obama getting in. A charismatic, good-looking black man who has since devastated the average American. Yes, that's a good point. Now, Stephen Crabb isn't a charismatic black man. He's a charismatic white man. And he does have the sort of, he wears woolly jumpers, I would guess. And he'll be able to maybe deliver, at least they hope he will, these horrendous abuses of people with disabilities and poor people with maybe more, I don't know. He'll be able to sell it better maybe than Smith. Find that very interesting. I find that very interesting. Shall we move on then? It was always going to be heavily focused this morning on Ian Duncan Smith. and these people. Remember, folks, these are the people who sent and do send harassing letters to people with terminal illnesses, threatening them with sanctions for not coming to assessments. You know that. I'm going to repeat that we've heard this on the Richie Allen Show. Go to youtube.com, look for the Richie Allen Show. We broke the story about people being asked about suicide. It's the Hunger Games Society. Sell off everything. Get rid of everything that's worth anything. Sell off housing associations. That lousy bastard, George Osborne, has told housing associations to sell off their houses. So in the near future, there'll be no social housing at all. There will be nowhere for poor people to live, which is all part of what David calls the Hunger Games Society. Starve people to death. No social housing. Well, they can't afford rent. I mean, we rent in the private sector, and it's expensive, I can tell you. We don't have a landlord who takes the piss. He's not a bad guy at all, but it's expensive. And if the future Mrs. Allen was to lose her job and the little bit of funding that comes into the Richie Allen Show was to disappear, well, we'd never get a social housing house. We would never get one to rent, so we would be homeless. They have engineered a paradigm where most of us we're only one missed monthly paycheck away from being on the streets. Do you know that? Do you realise that they've engineered it like that? Most people don't. You're off your head, Richie. You're a madman. And while all that goes on, the guy who's basically inflicting this misery on millions of people is sticking hundreds of pounds worth of cocaine up his nose every single day of the week. So much so that they can even joke about it in Parliament, as Labour MP Chris Bryant did this week.
Mind you, I have to say, Mr Speaker, that there were some things to rejoice about. I'm particularly glad that the Severn Bridge tolls will be halved, thanks to the campaign by my honourable friend for Newport East and her colleague sitting next to her, the member for Newport West. And last week, I'm sure you will remember, Mr Speaker, I announced that the obesity strategy would be out soon. And now we have it, or at least part of it, the sugar tax. And I'm delighted that finally the Chancellor has realised the dangers of Coke. It's just a shame, Mr Speaker, he couldn't bring himself to use the word himself and said the word cola instead. Maybe the leader could explain to us why.
So why is Chris Bryant and other Labour MPs not tabling a motion that George Osborne resigns because he's a coke addict? Now, don't get me wrong now. I have sympathy, and I have a lot of sympathy. I'm not Peter Hitchens here. I have a lot of sympathy with people whom have become addicted to drugs. I really do. And society should enable anybody who's become addicted to a substance. We should be enabling people to get help and to come off it, and we should be supportive of it because it's an illness like everything else. But when the guy sticking hundreds of pounds worth of cocaine up his nose a week is a guy laughing his arse off at the plight of the most vulnerable people in society, well, it's time to stop laughing at it. It ain't funny, It ain't funny. And Chris Bryant, yeah, it's funny. I know everybody in the independent media, go Chris Bryant. No, not go Chris Bryant. Stop laughing at it. It's your job to expose it and to challenge George Osborne to take a drugs test before the next Prime Minister's questions. Okay? But they're all in the same club, people. That's the point I'm making. They're the same gang. They eat dinner together. They spend time together. We foolishly believe, or are led to believe, they're in opposition to one another. No, they ain't. No, they ain't. I said I'd mention the NHS because it's important. David Laws, the former Liberal Democrat MP and former minister, has written a book. And in the book he claims, and he was also on the Andrew Marr show earlier on today, in the book he claims that there's a serious row developing in the government at the moment, or from within the corridors of the government at the moment, because of an election pledge that they made to give £8 billion to the NHS to fill a black hole in the NHS budget. Okay, put simply, the NHS is £8 billion short of funding, right? Now, in his book, David Laws has basically said that Downing Street was told in a report years ago, well, 2 or 3 years ago, that the health service needed £16 billion extra a year by 2020, but that Downing Street, George Osborne, David Cameron, dismissed it as a joke. A joke, basically. Right? And that they ordered the head of the NHS to cut the figure in half. Now, that man is Simon Stevens. He's the chief executive of the NHS. A report said that we need 16 billion quid. The government basically put a gun to his head, put pressure on him, bullied him to say that it's really only 8 billion, not 16 billion. And there's a scandal blowing up about this. The scandal, of course, isn't getting the headlines because of Ian Duncan Smith. Read into that what you want. Now, the NHS is being systematically destroyed, deliberately, to push the British public into accepting that privatisation is the only way to deliver an efficient service. That's what's going on. Now, I've been banging that drum on the radio show since it started, and my friend and colleague David Icke predicted this years ago. There is a mass extermination programme, and we are on the end of it. You might hear more about that. Bullying. This is the sort of thing that should bring down a government, by the way. Now, don't sit there for a minute and think, this is exaggeration. If the British government coerced the head of the NHS into telling lies about how much money the NHS really needed, that should bring the government down and we should have an election. If we were living in a democracy. But we ain't living in a democracy. I had an email from Jeff, who was listening to us really early in New York City. It's coming up for 8 a.m. there. In New York City. How are you, Jeff? Jeff says, I really like Sunday View, Richie. You don't do too much American news. I don't, Jeff. Sunday View is very UK news-centric because of the time that it's made. It's made in the AM. But remember, Jeff, first of all, it's 50-50 in terms of news in the radio show during the week between America and Europe. It's 50-50. But remember, Jeff, everything I am saying here today applies to the United States as well. Because the same things are going on, but with different characters and different actors. But I appreciate it. But I hope, the fact I'm not telling you too much about what's happening in your country at the moment is not spoiling your enjoyment of this programme. However, it must be said, the US newspapers yesterday, and I believe today, the Sunday papers are full of Trump, Trump and more Trump, and whether or not the Republican Party can deny Trump the nomination, even when he secures the delegates that he needs. You will remember we learned last week riots have been threatened and civil unrest if the GOP, the grand old party, were to find a legal way to drop Trump. He's pretty much a shoo-in to win the nomination. Now, I won't bore you because you know that I believe it's a massive mind game to make Trump a stalking horse for Hillary Clinton. And the idea that he's a maverick and a renegade, and the idea that he's an independent man's man who can stand up to anybody because he cannot be bought is nonsense. It's nonsense. I'm not going to speak to that. It's so ridiculous. Apparently, in the last couple of days, he's been bringing Sheriff Joe Arpaio with him. I interviewed that lunatic on the radio in Spain a few years ago. He's the Sheriff of Maricopa County. Our good friend Sean Atwood knows all about him. Check out SeanAtwood.com. Online, Sean wrote books about his experiences in Joe Arpaio's jails. A total madman, one of the most corrupt men alive is Joe Arpaio, and Trump is hawking these people around with him from venue to venue to support his candidacy, when you and I think at this stage both know that what's really going on there is that Trump is effectively a stalking horse for Hillary. Now, Lady Backcat, or is it Laid Back? It's Laid Back Cat on Twitter. How are you? Good morning. Laid Back Cat, he or she has tweeted me a meme. I'm going to read it. Now, I don't know if it's true or not. So I'm first of all going to tell you what I'm about to say. I have no idea if it's true or not. Don't take offence, Laid Back Cat. It might be true, but I don't know. And the meme says, "Hi, I'm Stephen Crabb, MP, the new Department for Work and Pensions Secretary. I bought a flat in London for £68,000. Where, though? I'm very suspicious straight away there now. Where did he buy a flat in London for £68,000? I want I want answers, laid back cat. Well, tell me, if there are flats going in London for £68,000, I could probably afford a mortgage, you know. But anyway, it might be true. Apparently, he then used taxpayers' money to refurbish it and sold it on for £240,000. And he did vote to take £30 a week from the sick and disabled, which will result for many people losing £3,000 a year. Stephen Crabb. But you know what, laid back cat? He looks and sounds better than Ian Duncan Smith. Sean tweeted me to say, Richie, billions of NHS money going out to private corporations, training schools around the world, Qatar being one of the many. That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. Ronan has tweeted that great quote. They have money for wars, but they can't feed the poor. Billions are spent on developing, manufacturing weapons, on funding the British Army, on funding things like Trident, the nuclear deterrent, which is a load of nonsense, when you could probably end poverty in Britain today, probably with a couple of billion quid, probably. Undoubtedly. Absolutely undoubtedly. I haven't got much more else to tell you, by the way. I just want you to stay with davidicke.com/headlines. That's davidicke.com/headlines. Please join me tomorrow, Monday, for the Richie Allen show, in association, of course, with davidicke.com, the radio show. Some terrific guests lined up during the week. I'll tell you who's on tomorrow, Monday. Jordan Maxwell joins me for the show. He'll be with me tomorrow. Don't miss that. Share it around. Do check out our YouTube channel. If you missed any of the interviews on the programme in the last week, they're all on the YouTube channel. Simon Stewart looks after that. Thank you, Simon. Stay with redistribution.co.uk, and on my website there are details on how to support the show with PayPal or with bank transfer. Please support the show if you like it, if you listen to it. Don't turn your back on it if you can afford it. There are a lot of people listening to this programme, I know, who could maybe afford to make a contribution and don't do it. Please have a think about that and do it. For those who listen and who can't afford to donate, don't worry about it. Don't think another minute about it. Help out in other ways by sharing the podcast and the YouTube videos on my behalf. So that's it for Sunday View then. It's been nearly an hour. It's been live. It will be live every Sunday from here on in at 11 a.m. GMT. Don't send me any tweets or emails about how short it was and that it could go on a bit longer. It won't be going on a bit longer. I have to have a life as well. So thank you for listening. And to everybody who tweeted in and who could be bothered listening to it with such short notice, I thank you. Just before I go, Michelle says, Richie, many listen to biased media propaganda about people living beyond their means. The government have sold services beyond their means. That's absolutely right. You know, we did whole programmes on public services, on state assets being sold by this government for pennies on the pound, which is fraud and which should result in criminal prosecutions for the likes of George Osborne and for David Cameron. But they won't. So to Anne Selly, good morning, Anne. Lovely to know you're listening, Anne. And to Karen and everybody else who tweeted in, thanks for doing it. Have a wonderful rest of your Sunday. Enjoy yourselves. Look after one another. Get out in the sunshine if it's sunny around you. Get out for a bit and get a bit of fresh air. I know, chemtrails. I know. But get out anyway. And I look forward to your company tomorrow at 8 p.m. GMT on the Richie Allen Show in association with davidicke.com. Even that will be live. Until then, bye for now. Oh, by the way, for the rest of the day and tonight and tomorrow, I'll be running on the platforms last week's episodes of the Richie Allen Radio Show. Thanks for listening.